Rancher sat alone with a hungry baby after his wife passed, until she knocked with full breasts. Sage Creek, Wyoming. Winter, 1879. The wind screamed across the plains at night. Not a howl, but a long, cutting cry that carried over the frozen fences and into the bones of men. It tore through barbed wire and rattled loose shingles from the roof of Ethan Cole's ranch house, slamming against the window panes with fury that belonged to the lonely. Inside, the fire burned low. The light it gave off was pale and tired, the kind of glow that made shadows look alive. And from the small cradle near the hearth came the sound that had haunted Ethan for weeks now. His daughter's crying. Thin, sharp, desperate. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered, rocking her against his chest, voice rough from sleepless nights. "Please, just a little." He tried again with the bottle. Warm goat's milk, the best he could manage. Grace turned her head and wailed harder. The sound pierced through him, raw and helpless. The bottle slipped from his fingers, rolled across the wooden floor, and clinked to a stop against the wall. Ethan's shoulders sagged. He bent down, picked it up, wiped it clean, and tried again. Nothing. Her little fist clenched tight, her face red as fire. He'd been strong once. The kind of man who could break a horse, carry a steer on his back, or ride 2 days straight through snow. But now his hands shook. His beard had grown thick and uneven. His eyes, bloodshot and hollow, stared down at the child who needed more than he could give. It had been a month since Lillian died. A single month since the fever came through the house like a thief, and by dawn he was a widower. She had been 28. Grace had been 2 months old. Now she was 3, hungry, starving, and refusing every drop that wasn't her mother's. He'd tried everything. Warmth, sugar, patience, prayer. Nothing worked. Grace screamed through the night, and Ethan rocked until his arms went numb. He hadn't slept. He barely ate. Every part of him was unraveling. Last week he'd saddled his horse and ridden to every home within 10 miles, neighbors' ranch hands, even the preacher. "Anybody nursing?" he'd asked. "Anybody with a newborn?" Each answer was soft and sad. "No, Ethan, no one left. Not since summer." The last stop had been the church. Even the pastor, a man of steady hands and stronger faith, had looked at him like a man already half gone. "There's nothing I can do but pray," he'd said. So Ethan rode home through the snow, hollowed out by silence. That night, he nailed a sign to the front gate, the letters scrawled rough by a shaking hand. Need help. Infant hungry. Breast milk needed. The wind tore at the paper until he hammered it again and again, his fingers bleeding from the cold. For days passed. No one came. The storm rose that evening like something alive. Snow hit the windows sideways. The world outside turned white and wild. Inside, Grace's cries climbed higher, louder, until Ethan dropped into the rocking chair by the fire and buried his face against her tiny head. "I'm trying," he whispered, voice breaking. "I don't know what else to do." She cried harder, fists flailing weakly. The sound filled the small house like sorrow itself. He rocked her faster. "You used to be the strongest man in Sage Creek," he muttered bitterly. "Now look at you, just a father with shaking hands who can't feed his own child." The fire popped. The wind howled. The night pressed close against the glass. And then, knock, knock, knock. Ethan froze. The baby's cry faltered for one breath, then rose again, sharp and wild. Another knock. Urgent, uneven. He stood, heart pounding, and opened the door just wide enough for the wind to slap him in the face. A woman stood there, soaked to the skin, cloak heavy with snow and rain, hair clinging to her cheeks. "Please," she said, her voice barely rising over the storm. "I need a place to stay for the night." He stared at her for a beat. long enough to see the desperation in her eyes, the way she clutched a small cloth bag like it held her life. He stepped aside. "Come in." She crossed the threshold slowly, dripping onto the floor. The door shut behind her with a shudder. She opened her mouth to thank him, but stopped. The baby screamed again. Her eyes darted toward the cradle, then to the child in Ethan's arms. Something changed in her face, recognition, grief, and something deeper. Her hand flew to her chest. Pressing against the front of her blouse were faint, wet stains had already spread. Ethan followed her gaze, not understanding. Her breath hitched. Tears welled. She faltered. 5 months ago, I gave birth to a boy. He died 2 months later. She swallowed hard. My body doesn't understand. It still makes milk. Her voice cracked. Every day I throw it away. Every drop hurts. Ethan stared at her. His throat closed around the words he didn't know how to say. "She's hungry," the woman whispered. "Please, let me help." He hesitated only a moment, then nodded. She set her bag down. Trembling, her fingers fumbled with the ties of her cloak, then with the buttons of her blouse. Ethan turned his eyes away, embarrassed but desperate. When she reached for the baby, his arms resisted for half a heartbeat, then released. She took Grace gently, instinctively, like someone remembering how to breathe. The baby rooted immediately, searching, finding, latching. A tiny gasp escaped the woman's lips as the milk flowed. Then silence. Not complete, but blessed silence. The kind filled with small sounds. The rhythm of sucking, the baby's soft breaths, the woman's quiet sobs as she held the child close. Tears ran down her cheeks, unchecked. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom. Ethan's vision blurred. For the first time in weeks, Grace's face relaxed. Her little fists loosened. Her cries melted into steady, hungry swallowing. He stepped forward, not speaking, and draped a blanket over both of them. The woman looked up through her tears. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Clara," she said. "Clara Bennett." He nodded once. "I'm Ethan. That's Grace." Clara looked down at the baby nestled against her chest. "She's beautiful." Ethan's voice caught. "She looks like her ma." Clara smiled faintly. Then she was beautiful too. For a while, there was only the sound of the storm easing and the baby's tiny sighs against Clara's heart. The fire crackled low, painting their faces gold and warm. And though neither of them said it, something sacred passed between them, the kind of moment that changes everything without trying to. By morning, the storm had broken. The sky was still gray, but the wind had softened, and snow hung heavy on the rail fences like white wool. Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Clara stood at the small basin, washing her hands. Her hair was damp but clean now, her face pale but calm. Grace slept nearby, full and content, her cheeks round with new color. Ethan poured coffee into 2 chip mugs and set one on the table near her. She looked up, surprised. "Thank you." He nodded. "You can stay as long as you need." Her fingers tightened on the mug, just until the road's clear. "I don't want to impose." He looked down at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. Her new cradle, built by his own tired hands the week before. "Don't sound like an imposition to me." She smiled faintly, but her eyes carried that deep, endless sorrow, the kind that doesn't leave, only softens. Outside, the morning was bright and cold. The snow glittered like glass, and the air smelled clean. Inside, the warmth was fragile but real, the warmth of life, of milk and wood fire, of something trying to heal. And as Ethan watched Clara lift his child into her arms again, he felt the faintest stirring of something he hadn't dared believe in since Lillian's passing. Hope, small and trembling, but alive. Sage Creek, Wyoming, 2 days after the storm. The snow had stopped, But the cold still clung to the world like a promise that wouldn't let go. Drifts rose high against the fence posts, glittering under a weak sun that never seemed to warm anything. Inside the ranch house, the hearth burned brighter than it had in weeks. Ethan Cole sat by the fire, mending a strap on his saddle, though his eyes drifted off into the corner of the room. There, in the cradle wrapped with wool and quilts, baby Grace slept soundly, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. And beside her, seated in a straight-back chair, Clara Bennett hummed a low, soothing tune. The sound was soft, uncertain at first, like someone remembering the words to a song half forgotten. Her hair, still damp from the morning's washing, curled loose against her cheeks. Every few moments, her hand brushed Grace's blanket, as if to be sure she was still there, still breathing. Ethan hadn't heard that kind of sound in his home since his wife Lillian was alive. He didn't realize until now how much he'd missed it. The gentle rhythm of a woman's presence, something steady and kind that filled the spaces between the wind and the wood creaks. He tried to speak twice, cleared his throat, then stopped himself both times. Words felt strange in his mouth these days, too heavy or too small. Finally, Clara looked up. She's sleeping better. Ethan nodded, fingers fumbling at the saddle strap. You've got a gift. Her smile was faint, almost shy. I just remember what to do. Some part of me never forgot. They felt quiet again, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, just comfortable enough not to need filling. By the third day, Clara had found her rhythm in the small cabin. At dawn, she rose with the baby, fed her, then moved through the rooms with the grace of habit, washing, sweeping, setting bread to rise. Ethan tried to protest once. You don't have to do all that, he'd said awkwardly, as she hung Grace's tiny shirts near the fire. She'd only smiled. Doing something keeps my hands from shaking. He had no answer to that. He simply nodded and went outside to split wood, the echo of her words following him into the wind. The ranch yard lay buried under white. The corrals were half hidden, the troughs frozen solid. Ethan worked with slow, methodical care, not because he had the strength for it, but because stopping hurt worse. The rhythm of the axe was the only thing that drowned out his thoughts. When he came back in near dusk, his beard was rimed with frost. The smell of beans and pork hung in the air, a small miracle. Clara looked up from the hearth, startled to see him linger in the doorway. I made extra, she said quickly. I thought, he raised a hand. Smells real good. She nodded, then stirred the pot again, cheeks pink from the heat. At supper, they ate in silence. Not the brutal kind of silence that breaks things, the kind that holds two wounded people steady while they learn how to be in the same room. Grace slept nearby, the softest snore rising and falling from her cradle. When the meal was done, Clara stood to wash the bowls. Ethan reached to take one from her. You cooked. Least I could do is clean. She hesitated, then smiled a little. Fair's fair. Their hands brushed over the same tin plate. Neither pulled away right away. The moment was small, the kind of thing you could miss if you weren't looking straight at it. But it lingered, warm as firelight. The next morning came gray and still. The wind had calmed, and the horizon glowed faintly pink. Ethan woke to the sound of humming again, the same soft tune, rising and falling with the rhythm of a cradle sway. He sat up on the cot, rubbing his eyes. Clara was by the hearth, hair tucked back, rocking Grace in her arms. The baby's lips still glistened with milk, her little fist clutching the edge of Clara's shawl. Something in Ethan's chest tightened, then softened. Didn't mean to wake you, Clara whispered. She's been restless. Ethan rose barefoot and crouched near the cradle. She's looking better. Colors come back. Clara nodded. She's strong. She'll outgrow us both one day. He smiled faintly, then caught himself and stood. I'll fetch water. When he came back, The bucket brimmed with ice-edged water from the well. He poured it into the kettle and set it over the fire. Clara's eyes followed him quietly. "You're kind," she said after a while. Ethan frowned, not use of a word. "Just doing what needs done." "Not everyone does what needs done," she replied softly. The kettle began to hiss before he could answer. That night, the wind rose again. Not a storm this time, just a prairie breathing. The sound of it slipping through the eaves was like a voice that wouldn't leave. Ethan sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. Clara sewed by lamplight, her fingers nimble despite the roughness in her hands. Grace slept between them, the small cradle placed near the warmth. Without looking up, Ethan said, "I buried her under the oak." "Lillian," Clara's stitching paused. "Your wife." He nodded once, eyes fixed on the rifle barrel. "Fever took her sudden. By the time I rode to town for medicine, it was too late." Clara set down her thread. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but his voice was tight. "She was a strong one. Never thought I'd see her weak." The fire popped softly. Shadows moved across the walls. "I had a boy," Clara said, almost to herself. "His name was Thomas. He got sick in July. The doctor said there wasn't much to do but wait." Her voice caught. "I waited." He never woke up. The only sound for a long moment was a fire. When Ethan finally spoke, it was low, careful. "You did what you could." "So did you." They sat in that silence. Two broken people sharing the same kind of quiet. Each tried to remember what it felt like not to be alone. Days became a rhythm neither of them planned. Ethan rode out to check the stock. Clara kept the home steady and warm. She started setting aside his coffee in the mornings, just the way he liked, strong enough to wake the dead. He began leaving the kettle full and ready before he left at dawn. When her hands cracked from the cold, he left a small tin of bear fat near her basin with a note in his rough scrawl. "For your hands." She never mentioned it. But the next morning, her palms looked softer. Some nights, when Grace cried, Clara would rise half asleep, and Ethan would follow wordless, just to hold the lantern steady. He'd stand there, shoulders hunched in his flannel, watching her hum the baby back to calm, the lamplight catching the soft lines of her face. There was peace in those hours, fragile, but real. By the end of the week, word had started to travel. Sage Creek was a small town, and news, or something pretending to be it, moved faster than snowmelt. She just showed up at his door. Someone said at the general store. Still making milk, but no baby to feed. Another added, shaking his head. "Ain't natural." Ethan didn't hear it firsthand. Not yet. But Clara felt like a draft through a cracked window. The sense that somewhere someone was looking her way and finding something wrong with what she'd done. Still, she stayed. Grace needed her. And Ethan didn't ask her to go. The cold deepened that week. The sky turned the color of iron, and the world seemed frozen in place. But inside the cabin, there was warmth. Not just from the fire, but from the small, quiet signs of a home rebuilding itself. That night, after feeding Grace and tucking her into the cradle, Clara found herself standing at the window. The snow had stopped. The stars were fierce and bright above the white plains. Ethan stepped beside her, mug in hand. "She sleeps better when you're near," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "So do I." He nodded, then looked out the window at the same wide, endless dark. "Winter's long," he said quietly, "but it don't last forever." She turned toward him, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Nothing ever does." The silence that followed was soft, the kind that could almost be mistaken for peace. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and cold, but inside that small house at the edge of Sage Creek, something new had taken root. Not love, not yet, but the first small flicker of what might become it. And for the first time since the fever took Lillian, Ethan Cole felt the warmth of belonging, not given, not earned, just quietly found. Early spring. 1879, the worst of winter had passed, but Sage Creek was still half asleep under frost. The snow had melted into ruts that caught the wagon wheels and froze again each night, hard as iron. Crows circled the stubbled hills. The air smelled of thawed mud and with smoke. Inside Ethan Cole's cabin, the fire burned low and steady. Clara folded Grace's blankets, humming softly. The baby, now almost 5 months old, lay in a basket near the hearth, gumming the corner of a rag doll Ethan had carved from pine. It was a quiet morning, the kind that fools a heart into thinking peace might last. Clara moved through her chores with the ease of someone who'd learned every squeak in floorboards. She set bread to rise, poured coffee, and smiled when Ethan came in from the yard, boots muddy, hat dusted with frost. "Morning," he said, voice rough from cold. "Coffee's hot." He poured a cup, nodded thanks. "You in her sleep any?" "Some," she said, smiling at the baby. "She dreams loud." Ethan chuckled once, a short, rusty sound that still surprised her every time it happened. Life had found its pace. Ethan mended fences and checked stock. Clara kept the home, washed, mended, and sang. Evenings, the three of them sat near the fire, Ethan carving, Clara sewing, Grace asleep between them. They didn't speak much, yet every glance, every shared silence wove another thread. Sometimes Clara caught herself watching his hands, the way they steadied a cup, the patience in them, and she'd feel warmth that frightened her for being pleasant. Ethan noticed her, too, the way she bit her lip when she laughed, or how she always tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear before leaning over Grace. He told himself it was gratitude, not longing. Gratitude was safer. But the prairie has a way of hearing what hearts refuse to say. When Ethan rode into Sage Creek for supplies that week, the air in Miller's store changed the moment he walked in. Men at the stove fell quiet. Mrs. Hardy stopped scooping beans. A cough somewhere in the back tried to hide a whisper and failed. Ethan kept his head down, took salt, flour, lamp oil, but the voices carried anyway. "Cole's got himself company up there." "Widow woman?" "Ain't widowed, far as I know." "Heard she's feeding the babe." "What kind o' woman keeps milk with no child to give it?" Low laughter, mean and nervous. Guess he found himself comfort through the cold months. Ethan's jaw worked, but he said nothing. He paid Miller exact change, nodded once, and left. Outside, the wind had turned sharp again. It felt cleaner than the air inside. Back home, he said little, though Clara saw the hardness in his face. "Everything all right in town?" she asked. "Same as always," he said. And that was all. The next days, Clara felt a difference. When she walked the short road to the well, she thought she saw movement at the ridge, someone watching. When she went into town for thread, 2 women by the dry goods counter fell silent until she'd passed. Stranger, one whispered, "Still feeding another man's babe. She'll bring ruin on herself." Clara kept her head down, paid for the spool, and walked home fast, breath hitching in the cold. That night, she said nothing. She fed Grace, folded her small things, and sat by the fire pretending to sew, while tears gathered unbidden. Ethan noticed, but he'd never been a man who knew how to reach across grief with words. He only set another log on the fire and said, "It's warm enough now you don't have to keep her so close to the hearth." She nodded without looking up. A few nights later, when the wind rose again, Clara couldn't sleep. The whispers had followed her into her dreams, twisting into voices from her past. Neighbors from Kansas, women who'd turned away when her own baby died. "You're cursed, Clara Bennett. A mother without a child isn't natural." She rose, wrapped herself in her shawl, and sat by the cradle. Grace stirred, sighed, went back to sleep. Clara traced a finger along the baby's cheek. "You're all right, little one," she whispered. "You've got a good father. You don't need the likes of me." Her heart clenched at the thought, but the fear was louder. Fear of losing again. Fear of being driven out. Fear of wanting too much. In the faint gray before dawn, she made up her mind. Ethan woke to silence that wasn't right. No humming, no clatter of the kettle. The bed by the wall was empty. The door stood ajar, snow blowing in over the threshold. His pulse kicked hard. Clara? Nothing. He checked the cradle. Empty. The breath left his body in a rush. He snatched his coat, yanked on his boots, and was in the saddle before he'd even thought where to go. The snow was light but steady, already covering faint tracks leading toward the cottonwoods by the creek. He spurred the mare on. Wind toward his coat, the cold cutting through every seam. But he kept going, eyes scanning the white world for movement. Then, near the old hay barn, he saw a shape against the wall. Dark cloak, a flutter of shawl, a small bundle clutched close. "Clara!" he shouted. No answer. He slid off the horse and ran. She was on her knees, half buried, rocking forward and back, the baby pressed against her chest beneath the shawl. Her lips were blue, her eyes wide and glassy. "No one's taking her," she whispered over and over. "They said I don't belong. They'll send me away." Ethan dropped beside her, voice gentle but firm. "You're not losing her. Not now, not ever. Look at me." She blinked at him as if seeing a ghost. "She's not mine, Ethan." "She's ours," he said, "because you saved her, because you stayed." He wrapped his coat around both of them, pulled her close, and lifted her, the baby, between them. "We're going home." Clara's head fell against his shoulder, tears freezing on her cheeks. Grace whimpered once, then went quiet, the tiny sound of her breath like a thread holding them all to life. Back at the cabin, Ethan kicked the door shut behind them. He set Clara near the fire, stripped off the wet shawl, and wrapped her in blankets. Grace he laid in the new cradle he'd built, the one he hadn't shown her yet, smooth pine, sanded edges. When Clara saw it, her eyes filled. "You built that." "For her," he said. Then softer, "For you both." She tried to speak, but the words broke apart in her throat. Ethan crouched before her, took her chilled hands in his rough ones. "You don't have to run, Clara. Not from this place. Not from me." Her tears spilled freely now. "I was so scared. They said things." "Let him talk," he said, voice low but steady. "They don't know what this is. But I do." He glanced toward the cradle, where Grace slept warm and safe. "This is family." Clara covered her mouth, sobbing once, loud, broken, then silent. Ethan reached up, brushed a tear from her cheek with a thumb. "Stay," he said simply. "Please." She nodded, barely, the word coming out his breath. "I'll stay." By morning, the snow had stopped again. A pale sun rose over the ridge, spilling gold to the frost-rimmed window. Ethan stood outside, splitting wood, every swing measured, certain. Inside, Clara sat near the cradle, feeding Grace, her face calm at last. From somewhere far off came the sound of a church bell, Sage Creek stirring to its gossip, its chores, its life. But here, in this small cabin at the edge of the prairie, 3 souls had chosen something stronger than rumor. Chosen each other. Clara looked toward the window where Ethan worked, breath clouding in the cold. She smiled, faint and sure. "Home," she whispered. The baby sighed, full and content. The fire popped softly, sending sparks upward like prayers. Late winter, 1879, the thaw never came. Snow kept falling in thin, dry sheets that whispered against the windows and buried fence lines overnight. The world looked clean, but everyone in Sage Creek knew better. White only hides what's dying underneath. Inside Ethan Cole's cabin, the fire burned high, the baby fat and rosy now, the room smelling of milk and bread. Clara hummed while she hung a line of washclothes near the hearth. Grace watched her, cooing at the sway of cloth. It was a scene that might have been ordinary anywhere else. But here, it was a miracle stitched together by will and luck. Ethan stood by the door, oiling the hinges of his rifle. His sleeves were rolled, the muscle in his forearms moving slow and deliberate. "You're set on going into town?" Clara asked. "Eyes still on the baby. Need salt. Nails, too. Can't fix the corral without 'em." She hesitated. "You heard what they said last time." He looked up, the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. "I've heard worse. Folks run out of things to do come winter. They start talking, and if they don't stop, then I don't listen." She wanted to argue, but only sighed. "Be careful. I always am." He buttoned his coat and stepped into the cold. The ride to Sage Creek took an hour through knee-deep drifts. The sky hung low and gray. When he pushed open Miller's store door, the bell jangled too loud. Every head turned. Again the hush. Miller himself forced a smile. "Mornin', Ethan." "Mornin'. Need salt, nails, lamp oil." Miller moved slow, filling the list. Behind him, Amos Grady leaned against a barrel of beans, a grin spreading like rot. "Didn't think you'd show your face, Cole. Heard you've been keeping a wet nurse for company." Ethan didn't look up. "You heard wrong. Don't sound wrong. Woman lives under your roof, feeding your kid? Sounds mighty convenient." A couple of men chuckled. The sound was small but ugly. Ethan paid for his goods and turned to leave. Grady followed. "What did she trade you, Cole?" "Milk for a bed." The room went still. Ethan set the sack of nails on the counter. He didn't raise his voice. "You got a wife, Amos?" "Maybe I do." "Then thank her proper tonight. 'Cause if I ever hear you say that again, you'll be explaining to her why you can't chew solid food." Nobody laughed after that. He took his supplies, pushed out into the snow, and rode home. That evening Clara knew before he spoke. His shoulders were too tight, his eyes far away. "Town still talking?" she asked. He nodded once. "Won't last." Her hands twisted in her apron. "They'll never stop. I've seen this before. Once folks decide what you are, they don't change their minds." He stepped closer. "Latch ain't talky. They don't live here." But she shook her head. "They do. They live in my thoughts when it gets quiet." Grace whimpered. Clara lifted her, pressing the child to her shoulder. "If they come here, they won't," Ethan said, but the words sounded like hope, not certainty. Outside, the wind began to rise again. 2 days later, just after dawn, hooves sounded on the frozen ground. Clara was by the fire, nursing Grace, when the first knock rattled the door. Ethan opened it halfway. 3 men stood on the porch. Their coats were dusted white, faces wind-burned. One wore a star pinned crooked on his vest. "Cole," said the tall one with the scar across his cheek. "Time's up." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Time's up for what?" "For that loan your brother took from us last spring. He's gone. Leaves it to you. I don't owe you a cent." "The land does," the scar man said, handing over folded paper. "You can pay, or we can take what's owed." Ethan unfolded it, glanced, then tore it clean in two. "Paper don't make thieves honest." The man's eyes narrowed. "You calling the law a thief? That badge on your friend don't make this legal." The deputy shifted uneasily. "Maybe we talk inside." Ethan shook his head. "Ain't nothing to talk." Scarface spat in the snow. "Then we take what we came for." He stepped toward the barn. Ethan moved faster. "You ain't the keen thing." The wind whipped across the yard, carrying voices sharp and thin. Clara stood at the window, heart pounding, Grace asleep in her arms. She saw Ethan's coat flare in the gust, the rifle he kept propped by the porch now in his hands. "Go home," he told them. Scarface laughed. "Or what?" Ethan's voice was low but steady. "Or I stop you." The deputy raised his hands. "We don't want blood, Cole." Then right off, the other man sneered. 3 of us. 1 of you. Don't be foolish. Ethan's finger brushed the trigger. You don't know how foolish I can be when it's for my family. From inside, Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. Family. The words sank deep. Scarface saw the movement in the window. So that's the woman. She worth all this? Ethan didn't blink. More than you'll ever know. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then the deputy swore under his breath and turned his horse. This ain't over. Maybe not, Ethan said, but it won't start here. They rode off into the white, leaving silence and hoof holes filling fast with snow. Ethan came inside, boots heavy with slush. Clara stood by the cradle, shaking. They're gone, he said. You shouldn't have. I should, he cut in gently. If I don't stand, they'll come back for more. Her eyes filled. You called us your family. He nodded once. Because that's what we are. The words broke her. She set Grace down and covered her face with both hands. Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides and drew her against him. She trembled, tears soaking his shirt. I keep thinking they'll take everything again, she whispered. They won't, he said, voice rough. Not while I'm breathing. The fire crackled behind them, bright and alive. Grace stirred, sighed, went back to sleep. Outside, snow drifted down soft as feathers. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Cole felt the weight of the world ease just enough for him to breathe. And for the first time, Clara believed maybe home could be more than a place. It could be a man who'd stand in the cold and call her family. That night, after the gun smoke had blown clear, the storm had quieted, but the wind still sighed around the eaves like a tired ghost. Inside the cabin, the fire threw a low amber glow over floorboards. The world outside was dark, wide, and endless. Inside, small, bright, and safe. Ethan sat at the table cleaning the rifle, the smell of oil and pine smoke thick in the air. Across the room, Clara laid Grace in the cradle and tucked the quilt under her chin. The child breathed in steady little sighs, unaware of how close the world had come to breaking. For a long time, neither adult spoke. The only sound was the soft click of metal, the crackle of wood, the low wind pressing against the glass. Clara finally said, You could have been killed. Ethan didn't look up. Maybe, but they'd have had to walk through me first. She drew the shawl tighter around her shoulders. You shouldn't have to keep fighting alone. He set the rifle aside, leaned back in the chair, and studied her face in the half-light. Wasn't alone. Not anymore. Her gaze faltered, fell to her hands. They were raw from work. Thin scars across the knuckles, but steady. I never asked you to stand for me. You didn't have to, he said quietly. Some things a man just knows. Later, while Grace slept, Clara fetched a basin of warm water. Ethan's cheek bore a fresh bruise, purple beneath the stubble. She set the bowl on the table. Let me see. He resisted at first, the way men do when kindness feels heavier than pain. But she waited him out, and finally he sat, letting her wipe the blood away. The cloth came away pink. Her fingers were gentle, smelling faintly of lye and soaproot. Hurts, she asked. Only when I forget she's safe. Her hand lingered at his jaw. The firelight caught the flecks of gray in his hair. She could feel the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips, the pulse beating steady there. You don't have to keep saving us, she whispered. He met her eyes. You think you're the only one been saved? The words hung between them, slow as smoke. Clara sat opposite him, the basin forgotten, her heart thudding loud enough she feared Grace might wake. I was half mad when I knocked on that door, she said. The world had taken everything. My boy, my name, the pieces of me that believed in kindness. And then you, she broke off, shaking her head. You just opened the door. Ethan stared into the fire. Didn't seem right to leave anyone out in a night like that. It was more than right, she said softly. It was mercy. He looked up then, and something in his eyes made her chest tighten. Lillian used to say mercy's just love that got tired of waiting. Clara smiled through tears she didn't bother to hide. Then she was a wise woman. They sat there for a while, fire snapping between them, the air full of unspoken things. Grace stirred and whimpered. Clara rose, lifted her gently, swaying until the baby quieted. Ethan watched. Her profile lit gold, the curve of her cheek against the child's dark curls. The sight struck him with a force that felt almost holy. He crossed the room and stood beside her. She looks just like you when she sleeps, Clara murmured. She looks like peace, he said. For a heartbeat, they were close enough that the heat from the fire seemed to come from between them. Clara's breath trembled. Ethan, he shook his head slightly. You don't have to say anything. I need to, she said, because tomorrow or the day after, someone will come again, or the snow will fall, or life will do what it always does, and I don't want to leave anything unsaid. He waited. She swallowed. I love this child, and I love the way you look at her, and I love the way this place feels when the wind's beating at the door and we're all still here. But I don't know if I have the right to any of it. Ethan's voice was rough. Maybe love don't come with rights. Maybe it's just what we give anyway. The fire popped, sending a spark spinning upward like a star. She looked up at him then, eyes shining, tears balanced on the edge of her lashes. He took her hand, turning it palm up the way a man might handle something breakable. Clara, he said, low and certain, you don't owe me anything. You don't owe this place anything. But if you want to stay, if you choose it, then it's home. Her breath hitched. You'd have me? After what folks say. Folks been wrong before. He smiled, the first real one she'd seen on his face. They'll get used to being wrong again. She laughed through the tears. It came out small, startled, like something infused with sunlight. Ethan brushed a thumb across her knuckles. We'll plant something come spring. Something that keeps green through snow. That way we remember this. Clara nodded. A tree. A white fir, he said. Tough kind. Grows slow, but it lasts. Her fingers tightened around his. Then that's our promise. Hours later, Grace slept again. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, hair loose over her shoulders. Ethan banked the fire, the cabin dim now except for the faint red glow under the coals. He turned to her. You should rest. So should you. I will. He hesitated in the doorway to his small room. You sure you're all right? She smiled faintly. I am. For the first time, I think I truly am. He nodded, started to step away. Then she said quietly, Ethan. He looked back. Thank you for opening the door. He didn't answer with words. Just touched the brim of his hat, an old habit from a time before grief, and went to his room. When the morning came, the snow had finally stopped. The air was clear, blue as glass, and the world seemed reborn under a hard winter sun. Ethan stepped outside with an axe and the memory of her hand still in his. Clara watched from the window, Grace in her arms, the baby's small fingers tangled in her shawl. The man in the yard raised his eyes to her, and for the first time they smiled at the same moment. No words, none needed, just the unspoken truth carried on a breath of cold air and wood smoke. They would keep building. They would keep standing. They would keep loving quietly, fiercely, through whatever came. And as the sun lifted over Sage Creek, painting the snow in gold, the promise held. 2 souls and 1 child, bound not by blood but by choice. 3 years later, spring of 1882, the prairie had traded its white coat for green again. Sage Creek glittered under morning sun, and the wind smelled of thawed soil and new grass. Where snow once buried the fences, yellow wildflowers now pushed through the cracks. Ethan Cole stood by the corral, sleeves rolled hammer in hand. Each swing was measured, unhurried. The rhythm of work and life had become the same. In the yard behind him, laughter carried clear, high, and bright as birdsong. Grace was 3 now, quick-footed and full of talk. She chased a chicken across the yard, pigtails bouncing, cheeks flushed with the kind of health only open land can give. Clara leaned against the porch post, a palm resting on the swell of her belly. 7 months along and glowing in the gentle light. The hem of her dress brushed the porch boards, dust motes swirling in her wake. She called out, "Grace, let that poor bird live another day." Grace turned, giggled, and ran back, flinging herself against Clara's skirts. "I caught her, Mama." Clara bent, breathless from the weight of her belly, and kissed the top of the child's head. "You surely did." Ethan came from the barn carrying a small white fir sapling, its roots wrapped in damp burlap. "You ready?" he asked. Clara smiled. "By the fence line, where the snowdrifts first melted. Good soil there." Grace danced in circles. "I get to dig." "That's the plan," Ethan said. They walked together to the far edge of the pasture. The wind tugged at their coats, soft now, almost kind. The ground smelled of life returning. Ethan set the sapling down and handed Grace a small trowel. She plunged it into the dirt, tongue between her teeth, serious as a preacher. Clara laughed, one hand steadying her daughter's shoulder. When the hole was deep enough, Ethan knelt and placed a little tree inside. He pressed the soil around its base, palms flat against the earth, then leaned back on his heels. Clara looked down at him. "Why this tree?" He brushed dirt from his hands. "White fir stubborn. Keeps its green through snow, wind, whatever comes. It remembers every season, but don't let anyone kill it." Clara nodded, eyes glistening. "Then it's ours." Ethan took her hand. "So are we." They stood together, Grace between them, all 3 holding to that fragile stem as if to promise the world it would grow. By dusk, the sky burned gold over the hills. The wind hummed through the tall grass, low and steady, a song older than anyone living. Clara sat on the porch rail, watching Grace chase fireflies with jar. Ethan brought 2 mugs of coffee, hers half milk, his black. She smiled. "You never forget how I take it." "Wouldn't dare." They watched the child spin through the yard, squealing with every flicker of light she caught. Clara's hand rested on Ethan's knee. "You ever think about how it started? That night in the storm?" He nodded slowly. "Every time the wind rises. I thought you'd turn me away." He looked at her, eyes soft in the firelight spilling through the window. "I couldn't have. You were the answer to a prayer I was too tired to say." She blinked hard, smiling through tears. "We were all starving for something, weren't we?" "Still are," he said and took her hand. "But at least now we eat together." Later, inside, Grace slept curled against her quilt, the jar of fireflies glowing dim on the windowsill. Ethan banked the fire, its orange light flickering over the cabin walls. Clara brushed her hair free, sat on the edge of bed, the baby stirring within her. Ethan came to her side. "You ought to rest." "I will. I just like hearing her breathe." He looked toward the cradle, smaller now than he remembered, polished smooth by years of gentle hands. "She's outgrowing that." "Time does that," Clara murmured. "But I'll keep it for the next little one." He smiled, reached out, and laid his rough palm over hers, over the child yet unborn. "This house will need another cradle, then. I think we can build one together this time." "Deal." Outside, the white fir shivered in the wind, its thin branches catching moonlight like threads of silver. Months later, after the new baby came, a boy with his mother's eyes and his father's calm, they carved names into the beam above the hearth. Ethan Cole, Clara Bennett Cole, Grace Cole, Thomas Cole, Not blood alone, but chosen, each letter pressed deep into the grain. When they finished, Clara ran her fingertips over the carvings. Now the house ever falls. Somebody'll know we were here. Ethan kissed her hair. Reckon the tree'll tell them first. Through the open door they could see it, taller now, its needles a steady green against the pale sky. Beyond it, Sage Creek ran bright with meltwater, the sound of it like laughter from long ago. Years from now, folks in town would still whisper about the cold place. Some would say it was haunted by the kindness of two ghosts who never left. Others, that it was blessed because crops never failed there and the snow never stayed long. But those who knew better, the ones who'd come to the door for coffee or a word of advice, would simply say the same thing every time. That's the house love built out of the storm. And they'd be right. As the sun sank, the wind settled. The white fir stood at the fence line, steady against the dusk, its roots deep in the soil of everything they'd survived. Grace's laughter echoed faintly from inside. Clara's voice answered it, low and warm. Ethan stepped onto the porch, looked out at the horizon, and tipped his hat to the evening. The land was wide, the sky unending. But here, in this one small clearing of light, 3 souls had found what the West so rarely gave, peace. And when the night finally gathered in full, it was not the cold that filled the cabin, but the sound of belonging,